If you know anything about video games, then Square Enix will definitely be a familiar name to you. By now, it has become a titan in the industry, being responsible for creating many established and beloved IPs, especially when talking about RPGs. Seriously, this publisher makes role-playing games as much as Brazil makes coffee. And Brazil makes a lot of coffee. If you ever played any title that involves magic, swords, waiting turns, or has anime art style, there is a good chance you played a Square Enix published game. Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Chrono, NieR, and the Mana series. It's obvious Square made its name as a powerhouse of RPGs. But there is one title that seems to have been forgotten by this company. It's a series that had sort of a short run, but it was, without a doubt, one of the most unique games that Square ever made. Their first attempt at a horror game, their first M-rated title. This is Parasite Eve. In 1995, Hideaki Sena, a Japanese pharmacologist, decided to write his debut novel. The plot is something difficult for me to explain, but I'll try. It was a story based around the idea that the mitochondria in the cells of our bodies are somewhat of a sentient species. It heavily tackled the endosymbiotic theory, also called symbiogenesis, a theory that affirms that mitochondria and other organelles originally were their own life forms before being assimilated into our cells. Biology aside, it uses this theory as background for its sci-fi premise. An evolved life form named Eve rises, wanting to start a revolution by awakening the mitochondria of human beings, which causes them to suffer from spontaneous combustion. Because why not? Eve's ultimate goal is to command a mitochondria army and take control of the world by exterminating eukaryotic life forms. That is us! I can't say much more because I haven't read the novel, but this is the original material of Parasite Eve. The thing is, this novel was quite successful in Japan. It got a film adaptation in 1997, which I haven't seen, but I do believe you can find it in the internet, if you look hard enough, I guess. 2 manga series, and in 1998 Square thought, hey, I can make a game out of this. I mean, if they made a game out of this, then I guess the sky's the limit. So Parasite Eve released for the original PlayStation. It followed up on the story of the novel and served as sort of a sequel to it, now being based on the US instead of Japan. The plot centers around Aya Brea, an NYPD officer who goes to the opera for a date, but halfway through the show the audience is suddenly set on fire. Oops! But Aya is fine, so you know, who cares? The main actress on the stage suddenly mutates and becomes a monster, which is revealed to be Eve. Not the Eve from the novel, but it also kinda is. Look, I don't know, man. Aya confronts her, she runs away, and then the story just goes on a roller coaster from here. The game was received relatively well, selling almost 2 million units through its entire lifetime. You could even say it's doing better than me. I didn't sell millions of units, so we gotta give that to Parasite Eve. But why am I talking about this weird game and its interesting story? Because honestly, I really think this game has some great potential, especially in its gameplay. See, it's very obvious where Square took their inspiration from. You don't have to progress much for the game to notice the similarities with the recently created Resident Evil series, which was a success at the time by redefining the horror genre in video games. Well, there are very Resident Evil-y elements here. The body horror, the resource management, the damn way PS1 Resident Evil characters move. It's not as bad in Parasite Eve, but the sequel literally copies the controls of RE and I just can't with this way of moving. Then you live like this? But through this, it's inevitable to think of it as Square Enix's attempt at Resident Evil. Not that it just boils down to that. I don't want to disconsider it as just an RE copy. It's pretty unique in its own right, and that's what I'm intrigued by. You take Square's long experience with RPGs and mix it with horror game mechanics, and you get a very interesting gameplay style. Here's how it works. When you get into a battle with these mutated monsters, you get stuck in a limited area. You're able to move freely within this zone, though you have to wait for a cooldown to actually attack. It's like the limit in Final Fantasy VII. Meanwhile, the opponent will attack you with their own moves, so you have to hold up and dodge their attacks, while you're unable to counterattack. Once the cooldown is over, you can attack. The action pauses as you can choose your course of action, be it using a fire weapon, using magic powers, or healing. This makes the flow of battle become kind of stiff, but I like how promising it is. Imagine if you could dodge the enemy's attack by rolling or sprinting. If you had a more fleshed out moveset that kept the sections where you're unable to attack as engaging as the moments where you take your turn. At the time, the standard for RPGs was the traditional turn-based system, where you could only select an option per turn, then wait for your enemy to take their turn, then it's your time to act again, and so on and so forth. Sure, there were a few exceptions here and there, but Parasite Eve participated in changing how role-playing games worked. Because of that, this attempt at something different has to be appreciated. Also, the resource management mechanics derived from horror games makes it feel all the more distinct. It's not just inventory management that is typically present in turn-based games. You have to pay attention to your ammunition. You can easily run out of bullets if you're not careful. And okay, I'm not the biggest fan of running out of items in games, but I think it's a very interesting thing to apply to an RPG. It adds more layers to the gameplay, and it certainly distincts itself from the standard at the time, where there isn't much to do outside of managing menus. But actually, this attempt at mixing turn-based combat with action has evolved along with the industry, and turned into a new subtype of game. Since the 90s, we had the Xenoblade series, the Souls-like games to some extent, Final Fantasy XV, and even the remakes of Final Fantasy VII as great representatives of the action RPG genre. This style of gameplay has been consolidated throughout the generations, becoming a very prolific type of game and dominating a considerable part of the industry. But during all this, where was Parasite Eve? Since the release of the original game, we got a sequel 1 year later, and a third entry to the series in 2010, which wasn't well received by the audience. And that's it. It is now just rotting in Square's gallery of franchises. What upsets me is how much potential is being wasted here. With how popular horror games are nowadays, imagine what could be done with the atmosphere of the first game, and now its exploration of body horror. Imagine all the designs of creepy mutated creatures they could come up with. What if they surfed on the remake movement that has been dominant in the industry for a few years and made a fully realized remake of the original Parasite Eve in the style of Final Fantasy VII Remake? But as it is, this franchise finds itself stuck in limbo. It shouldn't have to be that way. If series like Silent Hill and Resident Evil were able to get as big following as they have, I don't see why this one should not have it. If it had another chance to prove itself, instead of being defined by dated PS1 and PSP games. And of course this extends to other series that never had this chance, which is just sad, because it reflects on the gaming industry as a whole. A company like Sony, for example, will remaster The Last of Us a third time before giving a shot at a new Sly Cooper game. The same with Square Enix. They are just too comfortable and not willing to risk trying new things. So, rest in peace, Parasite Eve. A series that died without the chance of proving itself.